And we're on the air again with episode 6 of Wire 106.
Yeah, it's episode 6, season 1, and it's the called The Wire. This is like the eponymous title. Like, how would you say that? This is the
Yeah.
self-titled episode. Uh, yeah, that's the first time we actually see them up on the wire and tracking the pager calls once they've decoded them. So
Yeah.
for that, it's somewhat significant. But there's a lot to talk about in this episode, and your post that you wrote yesterday, I think, gets at a lot of it in some interesting ways. So I'll turn it over to you to kind of open it, and then, as usual, we'll start a discussion. I guess this is our last discussion before classes start, right?
Yeah.
We'll pick up 7, 8, and 9 next week of season 1, which takes us almost to the end. Well, the second week. But the next time we'll be doing another video after this one, but that will be kind of an intro to the course and a kind of overview of stuff. So this is kind of the end of our prequel, or whatever you want to call this, our pre-course warm-up.
Preseason. Yeah.
And it's good. Yeah, it is kind of preseason. I like that idea because I'm starting to feel like, I can smooth it a little bit. I'm getting into the wire, obviously, but I'm also getting into these discussions. So I think once next week comes, it will be a little bit smoother. So cool.
So this is the scene that opens up the episode shot.
Yeah.
That's This is Brandon who had gotten picked up at the end of the last episode, and obviously they were trying to get information out of him. He's been put through some work here. And they put him, like the crackers do, right across the bumper, right there for everybody to see, as Avon
Yeah.
put it.
It goes back to that Avon Barksdale note, right? Like wrap them around the roof so everyone could see him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Get a
um,
nice piecing together. And also, I mean, this scene when you open it up, and it's interesting because you're following the very opening of this episode. You're following the extension, right? So you got the wire, right? But then you got the wire of this extension cord that goes into Wallace's apartment, and you get to see something about Wallace's life. And there's that great. I love that. That's really brilliant the way they
yeah.
follow that in.
There's the wire going
Yeah.
into the apartment, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and just the play on what wire means depending upon where you are and how you live. And it's amazing in my mind to watch the beginning of this episode. And like again, I've said this again, the openings really blow my mind. And to see, you think Wallace and Poot are a kid until you see the five, you know, grade schoolers that they're living in this completely abandoned building that when they leave you see, call this number if you find trapped animals in here. And it's
yeah,
just such a amazing moment where the reality of the street, which is often reduced to drug dealers and cops, shows all the other victims, right?
yeah,
The poverty and the underclass,
yeah. I
all
mean,
the
those
other.
5 kids, we don't know who they are. Apparently, they're orphaned or whatever. Wallace threatens them with foster care if they don't get up on time. So he's sort of acting as their parent.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I guess it says something about his character and also the life he's leading there, sleeping in a vacant with broken windows and no power.
Yeah, and as a parent, I relate to him like being pissed off in the morning and like I don't have time for this. And like, there's this interesting moment where Wallace seems like such a kid, but he's sitting there giving them juices and chips,
Yeah,
and at the end of that opening with him and Poot waking up, they look across the way and there's that image, right? That starting image comes back to, oh my gosh, here's Brandon laid
yeah,
out like a deer across the roof or the hood of a car. Just
yeah. Um, it's interesting, like little secondary moment. We hear Wallace's clock radio go off to wake him up in the morning, and you only catch like one word of whatever's playing there, incarcerated, and then he slaps off the radio.
It's
Um,
interesting. Another point I was thinking about that same scene is you notice how Wallace, when he jumps up, right, he grabs his heart, as if he didn't know what that was. Was that a loud sound? Was it a bang? Was that a shot? Like, so there's that moment of just complete fear and terror. And then he
Yeah.
goes on with his day, and the terror is gone, and time to brush my teeth, and just kind of do the yawn and move on.
Yeah.
It's there's some subtle moments like that that
Yeah.
I found like they weren't lost.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that terror is sticking with him in a way. It
Yeah.
eats at
Well,
him a bit. Yeah.
and this series, this episode is all about that, right? I mean, it's all
Yeah.
about the terror that is haunting Wallace to some degree.
Yeah. And that goes right into the opening show, and then we see a contrasting scene of D'Angelo at home. Um, and he's there trying to get ready for the day, whereas everyone at Wallace's apartment was sleeping in their clothes, which, as far as we can tell, is all they have. And
Yeah,
he's got this full wardrobe full of things. He's like cutting off the tags because they're brand new, trying to
exactly.
decide
He's
what
hanging them up and checking out the angles of the
yeah.
colors, and then the thing he lines up is not even what he wears. And D'Angelo is kind of a play on
Yeah.
the dandy, right? Like he does seem to agree to some degree, like a dandy. Like he's got four Timberlakes that he's. Oh no, yeah, is that right? Yeah, Timber
Timberland, yeah.
and well, not Timberlake. What are they called? Timberland.
Timberland.
That he's choosing from those boots or two pairs of them. It's kind of interesting, the attention.
Yeah, yeah. And like Chardine says, no woman takes that long to get
That's
dressed.
right.
But there
Yeah.
was that thing playing on the TV, and I don't know if that was like a music video because you could hear music going on. Um,
Yeah, there's an interesting question about where that music's coming and the sighting of that music again. But yeah, in his
yeah,
apartment while it's playing.
but yeah, there's this scene of something going on. It's like an old black and white footage, and there's that guy sprawled out dead, sort of in the same position as Brandon was,
Yeah.
and the cops coming, just sort of like they did in the show, you know.
Well, it's interesting too, and the way you read that in your post, and obviously you're going to talk about it, but I really love the way you read that showing up and D'Angelo's kind of reaction to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, when he called it in, you could sort of see there's a weight on him, like we're gonna do some guy, but next morning he's over it, it's not big a deal. Whereas Wallace, he's like tormented by this scene,
Yeah.
and he's on the couch there talking about it, um, saying it messes with him, seeing him there with his insides hanging out, and I love that like little visual poetry there, like the gash in the couch and the stuffing coming out.
Yeah, it's just brilliant. And
Yeah,
it's one of the things about D'Angelo's character that I'm kind of, Wallace references the point when he talks about like you killed that woman to D'Angelo in this episode, and D'Angelo doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. And that's an interesting moment whether like did D'Angelo actually do that? Like it seemed like he did, but there's that question there, or
yeah,
just that he forgot it, or just like you're saying, like once it happens, he can put it away somewhere, right? Like the real thing from Crimes and Misdemeanors by Woody Allen, like the real horror of the murder was that you could actually forget its impact, or over
yeah,
time it could actually be something that is all right and you can live with. And it's interesting how D'Angelo, who obviously has at least killed one person and been part of at least the murder of several others, seems to be able to live with that. Like he
yeah,
seems to be able to get over it. And
yeah,
that's a kind of horror that, we don't talk about, like this notion of the banality of evil and what people do
yeah.
um, in the course of a reality like D'Angelo's.
The way I interpreted that the murder that he talked about and how he sort of forgot about it, I got the impression, like from watching the whole thing, that Wee-Bey actually did the shooting. D'Angelo went to the door, and he sort of like told the story like he did it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like he
Yeah.
was taking credit for it, but he was
Yeah.
telling Bodhi to, because him and Bodhi have this ongoing, kind of
Yeah.
Bodhi sees him as weak and is trying to push him. And there's a couple of times like when Bodhi throws the bottle at Wallace, and Wallace, like D'Angelo, doesn't necessarily belong on the street. And
Yeah.
D'Angelo picks up on that, and those are the ones he kind of favors. Even with Charlene when she gives the money back in the bar. So there's this interesting moment where it does seem like he's trying to pump up the murder, but you know, I wasn't sure whether Wee-Bey had killed her or not, especially the way he talks about it. So I didn't catch maybe that detail with Wee-Bey, but when Wallace says like that girl you killed, and he was like, "What? What are you talking about?" Like he had forgotten entirely. I thought that was a weird moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the other thing that put across. Like he sort of like got caught by the lie and he wasn't ready for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I like that.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, your
yeah.
screenshots. Let's see some more.
Um, so there's this other nice little sort of like a subliminal message. Um, you had that chess set in the foreground as they're having this discussion. And we had that discussion of chess before, the kings stay the king, and they're all pawns. Um, and here the scene is, the detectives are discussing what do we do. Rawls wants to like torpedo this case. He's got a move that he can play. What moves do we have to play Daniels off against this? It's strategy, like chess that they're talking about there.
Yeah, and that scene. What I really loved about that scene personally is that whole idea of clearance and stats as all that rolls after, right? And you miss that because there's so much happening and there's so much layers. But the comp stat will be huge in season 3, or what they call ComStat in The
Yeah,
Wire. And the fact that Rawls doesn't, he gets credit for the murders, for getting them as kind of off of his, off as a kind of considered a clearance, whether or not he has solid evidence to convict anyone, right? And
right.
in many ways, willing to blow a case just to get the clearance, just so that he looks good professionally. And
Yeah,
that's the way that statistical game is played. And they're working the system. And it's interesting that that whole scene, Bunk was telling Jimmy, look, this isn't personal. He wants the clearance. He wants it for so we can move on and go do other murders and not really give a shit about those 3 murders. And Jimmy obviously again wants to do police work, although McNulty's pain in the ass. His full nature of him being a pain in the ass starts to come out in this episode, and it just only gets worse in the ensuing
yeah,
ones. But you can see why he might be considered intolerable, right?
yeah. Um, so there's another nice little parallel scene I had here. And let me see if I can bring this up. And play.
Look like 35 cents. 35 cents a foot. And that's all the respect I have for y'all, okay? What y'all trying to do in our community with these quality domiciles here.
I
30
love the
cents a foot, take
terminology
it or
he
leave it.
uses.
It's major. I'm asking as a favor.
As a favor.
Yes, sir. A favor.
In that case,
No. Sorry.
So those two scenes play out back to back. Bubbles is trying to sell off some copper piping that they had stolen to the
Yeah,
guy at the construction thing. And the following scene, Daniels is bargaining with Rawls to hold off on charging those murders, which would trash their whole case.
that's right.
You know, in each case, they're getting shot down.
Yeah, and that's the like you said, the notion of the negotiation that goes on there in relationship between the two. Um, and I just love, I mean, as a side note, what a hard ass Rawls is. I mean, like even when he's in this episode, when he's doing his little like his histrionics, when Jay Landsman brings Jimmy back in to basically, eat crow and say thank you for bringing me, and Rawls is there. Isn't he a good-looking boy? And he's there by his football, and he's just playing the role of a complete jackass. It's just I love Rawls for that.
Yeah,
He's great.
there was a thing in one of the commentaries where Simon or one of the directors was talking about how the writers were always like, trying to come up with lines for Rawls to say because he could just do it so well.
Yeah, he really the actor plays that role brilliantly. I mean, because Rawls really does become a presence and one you fear, like Jimmy. Like he's just kind of, he's this presence that you're always wondering when is Rawls going to find out and what's going to be the implications when he does. It's great.
Yeah. So I pulled another clip. Now we had talked about how music in The Wire is always coming from a source on the set.
That's right.
It's coming from a car, coming from a radio, boombox, whatever. But there's this one scene that shows up in this episode.
Yeah.
Let's go for this. I think this is the first time Avon is showing his face in public.
Yeah, that's right. And I love the way he's looking everywhere.
Yeah, we don't see anything that gives us a source for that music.
No. And plus, it's in slow motion, which is not something they use in The Wire often. So it's slow mode, and it's from the point of view of Avon looking at all the four corners, like you see that around. Like it's really him watching, and he's slowed down, and it's really kind of this unusual effect for The Wire, which plays itself so much like a documentary. Here, you have it like a kind of almost like a music video, almost, like you got these three guys, they're very much positioned, almost like the Wild Bunch, and they're slow mode.
Doing good.
It's great. I mean, it's cool because you're so not used to it, and it really highlights in some ways, which is not usually what Simon does, the effect of them walking in there, being a drug deal, of Avon Barksdale's power, of them throwing some money at Wallace, which they're about to do for tipping on the murder. It's against some of the logic of how Diamond has presented how they want to do the Wire. So it's an interesting kind of creative choice.
It's kind of, there's some real key things about this, right? He's out in the open, making his payoff. Paying off T2.
Everybody a little pressed, right? Oh yeah. Ain't no surprises yet.
And the way this
everybody lose
scene
on
ends
Friday.
up,
They are just a bunch of begging ass bitches,
just
Ain't nobody showed no money since. You keep it humming though, right, cuz? Hey, Oh, you got your hands up? You got your hands up?
It's also playful. You know what I mean?
I mean, you got that family thing going on there.
Right. Just like in episode 1.
Yeah, most def.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all that was going on,
Yeah.
and who's watching this thing?
Yeah, who's watching the store, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's right.
The cop, there's the scene he should be watching.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the car just as he picks up the camera. And it's like, what did I miss? So yeah, there's that. We talk about the theme of surveillance, but people aren't always paying attention. The guy's doing a crossword puzzle here, and this is like a key point. If they were to put that together with what they took off of The Wire, the murder that happened, they would have the whole thing right in that scene.
That's right.
But he's not watching.
Totally. And That's right. I mean, it would bring all the pieces together. And one of the things that was interesting, speaking about, putting pieces together and the fact that it's episode 6 of season 1 and we're just starting to hear about The Wire and the way in which this show is evolving like a novel, right? Not like your typical, episodic TV. And one of the things that I think Simon said in the first episode commentary, which was a great commentary, he talked about this notion of, you know, police work now, or this idea of police work and watching The Wire is so much more about not finding that one crystalline diamond-like gem that's going to solve everything. It's about being able to filter through all the information and all the different modes of surveillance and all the different inputs to make sense of it. And the idea he's suggesting is moving from this notion of this essential solution to, an issue or to a crime, into this idea of being able to filter and sift, which I think is also, for me, very much akin to what digital storytelling in the DS-106 way is about. It's understanding how different it is to narrate and to tell and to sift. And it's as if when Simon was talking about that, I was like, he's really making a case, for new ways of thinking about, filtering and understanding information as it comes in a social media world, right? In a post, a 21st century space where there's far too many inputs for us to deal with in any kind of legitimate way. And the point you make, which made me think of that, is there's a lot that we're going to miss, right? And there's this theory online I hear a lot that if it's really good or if it's really important, it will come back. Like it will come in some other stream, whether through your Facebook updates or on Twitter and a blog post you read or wherever. And sometimes I wonder about that theory. Like what if it's not true? Like what if that's faulty? Kind of like the point you're making, like Santangelo missed it. And the case, which maybe could have been popped wide open in that moment, is gone, at least for now. But although it does, circle back, but it's an interesting point that you brought up. So whatever. I mean, I was fascinated.
Yeah, there's two things in what you just said there. I mean, one, when you talk about how that police work changing from looking for that diamond to putting all the pieces together, that actually mirrors everything that people talk about within the library world about information literacy. Students come in thinking that they can find one perfect source that will, answer everything they need to know for the research paper. And that's not true. You have to find a bunch of different things and take pieces from it, put something together. And the other thing about if something's good, it'll always come back. Yeah, that doesn't always happen.
Doesn't. Yeah.
I've seen it, in the news media. If you remember back to like the first Iraq War, after the bombing started, before the ground troops went in, I remember this huge article in the newspaper about the U.S. ambassador there had actually given Saddam the green light to invade Kuwait. She told them that we take no position on inter-Arab conflict. And when I read that, I thought, this is going to be a scandal.
Yeah.
Either she was a loose cannon or that was actually White House policy.
Yeah.
But either way, that's a big deal. And it was a major article, not front page, page 3, top of the fold. That's a big deal in the newspaper business. Never heard anything about it again. Like if you weren't reading the paper that day, you don't know about that.
Yeah.
And nowadays, that whole incident only shows up in conspiracy theory stories.
That's right. It's not legitimate news because it wasn't passed on a million times, right?
Yeah, because it would embarrass the newspapers, I guess, in a way.
And it's a weakness of this notion. I mean, networks are very powerful, but it's also one of their weakness, right? Like you get stuck into this kind of recycling of what you think is the truth. Yeah. And more truthful the more times you see it, maybe. I mean, there's a different algorithm to our notions of what's important and what's real. And so anyway, I mean, that's a far cry from where we are with The Wire, because I love how The Wire in some ways kind of resists that, by saying, and Freeman is the one who says it, and it's the epigraph, because I love the epigraphs, is, it all matters, right? Every piece matters. All the pieces matter, I think, is how it goes specifically.
Yeah, all the pieces
And
matter.
it's when him and Presbalewski are sitting at the wire doing what might be considered, as Herc says, I want to be knocking skulls, and Freeman says, this is the job. The job is waiting, is looking, is watching, and is putting the pieces together, like Stinkum's pager number and Stringer Bell's pager number and their phone numbers, and starting to create, right, the wall of information that's connecting the dots and creating a network universe of information that you start to interpret. Because the network often, if you let it, will interpret the reality for you. It can give you information, it can connect with you with people, but it's still your job, I think, to make really, thoughtful and kind of connected relationships between these things, to understand them and to understand your sources, who's giving you that information. And I don't know, I mean, the notion of just how we understand authenticity and credibility and reliability changes in a networked world, not only if you're a police officer, but also if you're a learner or if you're a student or if you're an educator. So it's interesting to me the way this idea of it all matters for this novelistic approach to The Wire also very much matters for how we think about, education and knowledge collection and, thoughtful interpretation in our moment.
Yeah, and actually where Lester says that thing, all the pieces matter, it's because they were listening into a conversation and Presbosey marked it as non-pertinent, doesn't matter. Because what happened in the conversation wasn't anything that Presbalewski was looking for. No drug talk, so what good is it? But Freeman picked up on the clues, they don't say their names, and if they do, they're told not to, and they talk in code, and all that stuff matters.
Yeah, it all matters. And I think that's actually what I love about that tagline, and we've been talking about this for 6 episodes now, like, the details all matter. Like, those specific things all tell a much broader, and in the case of, say, the couch that you pointed out today, poetic visual of a theme that kind of enforces, this ongoing meditation on America. Between the wars, I mean, I don't even have to say it, like, post 9/11, really. So it's compelling.
This was another shot that I liked. Bring this up. We have Daniels is having a sit down with, is that Augie?
Yeah.
He's the alcoholic cop. Like, why did you come to work? And you're going to check yourself into rehab. End of story. But you can see Daniels in the front. You can see the reflection of the guys talking to in the glass behind him. There's a nice little bit of storytelling going on there in that composition. And as the scene plays out, Daniels leaves, and that image in the glass just comes more into focus as Augie sort of reflects on himself.
Yeah, and Daniels puts his hand on his shoulder and says, take a few minutes to think about it,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice little visual way of, like, telling what's going on there.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about it a bit yesterday, but there's also the moment in this scene where, they bring Omar, who's dealing with the death of Brandon, not to mention not to mention McNulty bringing his kids to pick up Omar, which is a whole nother kind of crazy sideline. But he brings him, and there's, to some degree, when they go down into the basement, he's like, why does this look like Omar asks, why doesn't it look like some regular police department? And Jimmy says, like you, we're kind of playing our own game out here on our own. Kind of likening him to being outside the game, like Omar's outside of the Barksdale game, right? So Barksdale is the kind of power and Omar's working around that power, right? To some degree, or at tension with it, just like Jimmy and the detail are now very much in tension with the police department. So again, that paralleling through this seemingly, offhand text or dialogue that's really, picking up on that clues to read what's happening in the story. Because, this is my third time watching The Wire. I kind of understand now going through these episodes again. I can pick up on some of the complexities, but if you're watching this for the first time, it's like it's all coming at you, and it's 90 miles an hour, and they don't give you the flashback cue like they did in episode 1. That's gone now. Like, they're not feeding you the story. They're asking you to be a very close watcher, which kind of goes to our earlier conversation about so much information and being able to sift through like a good detective would to make sense of what they're really trying to say.
And it says something like you brought up, I think, in the first episode about how Simon and the directors are training us to watch it.
Yeah.
Because, like you're saying, everything's coming at 90 miles an hour. To someone stepping into this episode, they're going to say it's slow.
Yeah.
Because they're not getting it in the face at 90 miles an hour.
That's right.
It's all there, but it's subtle. It's natural. It's not forced.
Yeah.
But because we've watched it, we're drawn into that.
I'm wondering, and I came to this series from episode 1 through, but I wonder what it would be like for people to come in medias res, right? Like in the middle of a Wire season. Like, how would that be as a watching experience? It would be like starting to read a novel from the middle. Like, what would that be like? Like, could you do it? How would you navigate that? So it's interesting to me, like, how would you do that? I mean, you probably could. Anyone could do anything, but I wonder how much you would miss. Because every episode is referring back not only to the episode within itself, but to several before and picking up on threads that were left. I mean, it's not necessarily a straight line at any point in time.
Yeah, there's multiple plots going on all the time.
Yeah. All the time.
I think if someone came in at the beginning of a season, like if you came in at the beginning of season 3,
I think of them as like, they're like 5 novels telling their own narrative, and then at the end you have the montage that brings it together. So they even understand themselves by season.
Yeah.
But from episode to episode, they have their themes, but they don't have like, that was this episode. Like, and that's why when you think back, and I'm sure people who are watching it for the first time, it's like you can't distinguish the episodes. Like, I can now, like the target, the detail, the pager, the wire, the buys. Like, now I have them in my head and I understand they're distinguished. But you got to watch it how many times before you start distinguishing episodes, because it's all flowing together as a story, just spaced out over time.
Yeah. Yeah, it flows. If
like
you watch, you can see the discrete elements between an episode. For example, this episode, let me find the closing shot to this one. Is a photograph of that scene we saw right at the beginning. It's got that parallel. And it's like a kind of a symmetry, and we kind of saw something like that in an earlier one where they open and close with similar shots.
That's right. And that was actually a corpse in a morgue, right?
Yeah, we saw him in the middle too. Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. So you've got those parallels, and that like bookends it and sets this episode off, but all the story, all the little subplots are connecting in and out to all the other episodes.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I can't wait because there's more to come. We have 7, 8, and 9 we'll do next week, but for now, that's kind of our preseason.
Yeah. So preseason, we're 6-0.
Well, I don't know. That might be a little bit inflated, but we can do that, right? Because it's ours.
Yeah. Yeah. All
All right,
right.
Paul.
All right. So we'll wrap
Fine
it up
work.
there. Till next time.
You got it.